Hey, this is Rick Rogers. This is my final model for the 2020 presidential election. A review of the model that I put together. It is a poll average. I use weighted polls that are weighted by the recency of the poll and the quality of the poll. And then I have several adjustments to take into account polling error, which was important in the errors of 2016, and also issues related to the election. All total, my assumptions are highly favorable to Donald Trump, giving him a total handicap of at least 5%. In the popular vote, I'm predicting that Joe Biden will win with a majority, 51.1%. There is some discussion of a narrowing here towards the end of the election. I'll talk about that at various points in this presentation. We see a little narrowing in the national polls, but these numbers fluctuate up and down every day. It's not a huge narrowing. Um, Probably the more important area to look is what's happening with those individuals who are uncommitted. That number is going down, and many of those individuals seem to be going to Donald Trump. The total gap right now is 7.5%. This is a histogram of the qualified polls within my 14-day window. And that tallest bar there in the middle of the distribution is the value of 8%. So that is our median and modal category in the national polls. You see there seems to be a little bit of a cluster around 5 and 6, and also another cluster coming up there in double digits in the range of 10 and 12. And I have not gone through to try to figure out why this is, but it does look like there are three different groups of polls, and they're clustering around those 3 points. Down at the bottom here, we now see the projection that everybody wants to know, the Electoral College. Right now I have it at 279 to 259. That's ahead of where Biden was at the end of September, but lower than where he has been earlier in the month of October. That's not as big of a narrowing as one might think, because we have that group of flip-flop states that I talked about in a previous presentation, where from one day to the next you see states moving back and forth across the line between Biden and Trump. So we'll look at those and talk about the scenarios that occur because of them in just a bit. Here we see a comparison of my numbers in the first column with three other sets. Real Clear Politics is the column next to it. Real Clear Politics has a much narrower election. When we look down at the electoral votes, Real Clear Politics has two sets of numbers, one with toss-up states and one in which they assign states to the candidate leading. I did not do that because my assumptions actually are handicapped in favor of Trump. But you'll see on their no toss-up map, they actually have a better outcome than I predict, even though they have a lower gap in the popular vote. My result is similar to Nate Silver and the 538 website in terms of the popular vote, probably because I'm using his weightings in my model. But notice what happens down there in the Electoral College. He is the most optimistic about the possibilities that Biden will win. Then over here on the far right, we have CNN. CNN sees a large lead for Biden in the popular vote, but their projection for what's happening in the electoral vote actually looks fairly similar to mine. Now let's get into the importance of Pennsylvania and Florida. So what I have here is where various states now sit in my scenarios. The toss-up states that are leaning to Biden, the toss-up states that are leaning to Trump. On each state side, I have states that are very close to the toss-up category, and these states have been moving back and forth within their respective candidates with regards to their strength. Then in the middle, we have the three flip-flop states, and those are states that have been crossing back and forth between Biden and Trump during the month of October. Right away under toss-up Biden leading, we see the importance of Pennsylvania. However, as we look in the toss-up Biden leaning category, with the exception of Nevada, all of Biden's states uh, uh, are places where he's polling with at least 50%. That's a magic number. When we look at last election, Hillary Clinton was polling much less, and because Biden is polling high, there's not, in terms of the actual numbers, there's not far that Trump can go to catch that. He actually has to see those numbers coming down, and we do think that in terms of the percent for the Democratic candidate, if we look at the history from 2016, that part was right. What was wrong was the Trump number and not catching the fact that all those undecided voters were going to move to Trump. So in this election, if the undecided voters move, the only place they could catch Biden is Nevada, and that's only 6 electoral votes. So it is very favorable to Biden in the way things are right now. In the flip-flop states, the one that is most likely to go over to Biden is Florida. Florida is polling now just below 50%. So that's certainly not a guarantee that it's going to go Biden, but it could. Now, what I want to point out is that in all of the toss-up states, right now Biden is leading. So there is the possibility, we talk about Trump running the table as if he's going to get all the Great Lakes states, but there also is a possibility that Biden could run the table. So we're just not going to know that till the election. I don't have Biden running the table, largely because I think polling errors still favor Donald Trump. So the pollsters have fixed some things, but I don't think they've fixed all of them. And so there will be states where they have not predicted Trump to be as strong as he may actually be. Let's get into this Pennsylvania story more. That's been dominating the news on this next to last day before the election. And this is a story that Trump has caught up to Biden in Pennsylvania, and there is the possibility that Trump could win. So this is from the Real Clear Politics website, and the polls they currently list as the most recent ones in their average for the election, and they have Biden right now winning as 2.9%, and we have to keep in mind that in 2016, Trump was underestimated by 2.6. So if you take the 2.9 and subtract the 2.6, that means Biden has a very skinny lead in Pennsylvania. But you have to look at the polls that were used to determine that. So I marked here on the left the top 5 polls. 4 of the top 5 polls are skewing towards Trump heavily in all of the states. They stand out for this. Those polls are Susquehanna, Rasmussen, Trafalgar, and Insider Advantage. They not only skew towards Trump, but 2 of the 4 actually said that if Trump does not win, it is because of voter fraud, because their polls are so good. Now, what has happened in state after state is that these polls are hitting the RCP totals, all at or near the same time. So they're driving the averages for Biden down. So here in this polling average, we see Biden leading by only 2.9% in Pennsylvania. When we go over to Nate Silver's 538 website, we see something very different happening. This list of polls is very different from the ones on the RCP website. And you'll notice that only one of the 4 polls on the RCP site is regarded by Silver as the most influential poll, and that one in Pennsylvania has Biden up 3. If we take the 2 lowest ranked polls out, the Frederick polls, which are not really that well known, and the Rasmussen polls, all of the other pollsters are scoring this as a win for Biden between 5 and 7%. So that suddenly becomes a very healthy lead. So depending on which polling averages you look at, you're going to get a very different interpretation. I am inclined to go more with the silver approach here than the RCP approach because the RCP is not weighting the polls for the quality of the poll, whereas Nate Silver does that. And as a result, the higher quality polls are giving a better result for Biden, and I do think that's what we should be going with, at least in our understanding of the polls. Three major issues could affect the outcome of this election, and I don't have any control over them. I'm just interpreting what the polls say. The first, of course, is the accuracy of the polls, and we're quite concerned about that because of some huge errors in 2016. I do think that the estimates that are built off the polls have probably improved. We just don't know how much. I do, however, still think that um, rural, white, uh, lesser educated, evangelical populations are probably underweighted in the polls. So we don't really know what's going on there, and we won't until Election Day. The other thing about the 2016 errors is that um, they were about Trump, not about Clinton. So when a number was predicted for Clinton in a state, uh, the polls were pretty close to predicting how Clinton came out. What the polls did not predict was the shift of all these uncommitted voters to Trump at the last minute. That's why that 50% number in so many states for Biden is important, because if if we are repeating 2016 all over again, that would mean that Biden probably does have 50% in those states. The second issue is turnout, which is really hard for a pollster to figure out. You can say you're going to vote, but we don't know whether or not you really are. And some pollsters are actually putting out two different estimates, a low turnout assumption and a high turnout assumption. I happen to use the low turnout assumption in my model. Um, when we're looking at the news reporting and we're seeing all of these long lines of people, that does not necessarily mean that all those people are Democrats. So the Republicans are also saying that they are having a high turnout among their voters. And so the high numbers may or may not favor the Democrats. We tend to think they will historically, and certainly the pollsters and modeling the election think that a high turnout will favor the Democrats, but we don't know for sure. It does appear that the youth turnout favors Biden. We don't know if that's going to be strong or weak. Um, there is some discussion about the minority turnout. So it's not may not be as high as when Barack Obama ran. The question is how low will it be? It probably right now we don't think it's going to be as low as it was when Hillary Clinton ran. But this is in limbo, and in many of these close states, like Pennsylvania, the turnout in cities such as Philadelphia could be decisive across the entire state. Finally, I'm not even going to get into the post-election legal wrangling that might occur here, but I will say that one of the reasons why I'm certainly watching Pennsylvania closely is not just the possibility of polling error. Pennsylvania may turn out to be the worst state in terms of problems with ballots. So we have both the standard signature issues, we have some effort to change the deadline and make it earlier, but we also have a naked ballot controversy in Pennsylvania. And there is the possibility that problems with the ballots in Pennsylvania could be as much as 2%. Now, I have modeled that into my numbers, but it certainly is a concern there as Pennsylvania narrows some. As it gets narrower, we have less opportunity, there's less wiggle room there in figuring out who the winner is going to be. Just a comment on Congress. I think this idea that the Democrats are going to have a majority of the seats in Congress is overly optimistic. I'm not going to say it won't happen, but I do think that that's a case where some people are overly optimistic on what's happening. It does look like right now the Democrats have 45 seats that are either safe or leaning in their direction, and they will probably pick up Arizona, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, and North Carolina. Uh, the Republicans will pick up two, uh, So, with all of the discussion about the Democrats winning Iowa, it does right now look like that Joni Ernst has a thin lead for the Republicans, and that state is leaning towards the Republicans in the Senate. And in South Carolina, right now, it looks like Lindsey Graham will be reelected. We could be wrong there. Uh, Polling and state level is not as good, and for Senate level is even less. So we have issues there. Where the Democrats might have some legitimate hope is in Georgia, where their candidate does have a slight lead as of this moment, and in Montana, where their candidate seems to have is either ahead of or has caught up to the Republican candidate. So we're going to actually have both of those races are too close to call, but to assume that the Democrats are going to get one or both of those seats, that's just overly optimistic. Those are toss-up seats, and they could easily go the other way. I do expect the Democrats to retain control of the House of Representatives. Now my conclusion. I see Joe Biden winning the popular vote by a margin of 7 to 8%. I don't think that a Biden victory in the popular vote is up for debate. The issue is the Electoral College, which is a toss-up. I do see Biden as slightly favored. The outcome depends on Pennsylvania, but not exclusively. So he could possibly pick up Florida and lose Pennsylvania. There are some early indicators of the Biden win. The reason why we are interested in those is because we know that counting ballots in Pennsylvania could take a few days. And also, we have the issue that there'll probably be legal challenges if the election rides on Pennsylvania. But we do have some other states. So there are the three flip-flop states, Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina, that could easily flip over to Biden. Biden is leading there right now. Florida is the one that's easiest. My polls average has Biden leading there by 2.8%. I would want him at least 3, given my generous assumptions for Trump. We may need even more. There could be other states that go. Georgia is certainly under consideration, and that's a big state. If it does go Biden, Biden would not need Pennsylvania to win the election, and so we'll probably know about Georgia fairly early. There are 2 other states that are not really regarded as toss-ups in my model, but people keep talking about them because at various points over the past month, Biden has had a narrow lead there. And I don't think those are Ohio and Texas, and I don't think it's that Biden is leading and then the votes are going away or something like that. There's these random fluctuations in polls. So there is some opportunity, I do think, for Biden in those 2 states. So if either of those 2 states flip, that's also a Biden win, probably in the whole election. Finally, the Democrats will retain the House, and the Senate is still a toss-up. Thank you for listening to this presentation and my other presentations. I will be back in 2 or 3 weeks where I will assess the pollsters and see how good they actually did, and we'll even name winners and losers in our competition among pollsters. Have a good day. Thanks.